Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. And this is the place where writers like to gather and we talk about writing, all things writing, about writers and for writers. So we're glad you're with us today, either live. We got a lot of the regular crew in the chat room, so it's great seeing everybody and a few people we haven't seen for a while. So I think this is neat to see faces again. It is a full house, Melissa just commented. It's true. And thank you if you're taking the time to watch the replay. We really do appreciate you doing that and spreading the news about Writers Chat, because we really are a pretty good, neat, supportive community. So we like to have everybody here. My name is Jean Wise. I'm one of the co-hosts here. I'm joined today by my fellow co-host, Johnny Alexander, and Bethany Jett. So it's good to see everybody. And I'm going to turn it over to Johnny to introduce this week's topic and our special guest.
Oh, I'm so excited to have Karin Beery with us this morning. I think I first met Karin when my debut novel came out several years ago, and she was very supportive of that. So she blogs, she does all kinds of things, but mostly she's an editor, and a very, very good one. She owns Right Now Editing. She's an active member of American Christian Fiction Writers and the Christian, excuse me, and the Christian Editor Network. She teaches editing classes through the Penn Institute and serves as the coordinator of the Christian Editor Connection. She's the managing editor of Guiding Light Women's Fiction, which is an imprint of Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas. And besides all that, she writes too and has a cat. Look at that. Her debut novel is, I love this title, Summer Plans and Other Disasters. It released last year, and her next novel, Practically Married, will be available in October. So we're going to talk today about how to work with an editor and common editing mistakes that Karin sees as she works with her clients. So Karin, we're just going to turn it over to you, and we'll be asking questions, and there'll be probably questions in the chat, and we'll feed those to you too. So take it away.
Today, so I apologize. It's just better to get a few pettings out of the way. Otherwise, he will cry until I actually pet him. So he'll just join us for a few minutes.
Not a problem. We've had pets before.
Oh, good.
We're good.
My husband took the dogs, so hopefully we'll be good there. Just a little bit about myself. I live in northern Michigan. We still have a ton of snow on the ground. We are very much waiting for spring to arrive. Although I do still have my Christmas tree up. So hopefully it'll be down by tomorrow. That's the goal. But I got started on this whole journey actually almost 12 years ago now, because I wanted to write a novel and I couldn't afford an editor. I actually hired an editor and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I ended up hiring someone who didn't understand my needs, and we weren't able to communicate well enough that I understood what her services were or what she was offering. So at the time, I paid a decent amount of money for something that was pretty much worthless to me. It didn't provide any of the assistance that I needed, didn't give me any of the information that I needed. So I kind of made it my mission to help authors understand the editing process, know what kind of editing they need, and to find good editors, because literally anyone can put up a blog or a website or a Facebook page and call themselves an editor.
Yeah.
So it's really important not just to find an editor, but to find someone who works within your genre, especially within fiction or nonfiction. The woman I worked with was very nice, but she was not a fiction editor, and I didn't realize that there really is a difference. And there's a lot of techniques that you need to know as a fiction editor that nonfiction editors just don't understand. So the most important thing is finding someone that you can trust. Word of mouth is fantastic. If you have read a book that you just enjoyed everything about it, check the acknowledgments, check the front cover, see who the editors were that worked on it. If you have, or if you have a friend who is an author who's worked with someone who just knows what she's doing or he's doing, ask for a reference, ask if you can get in touch with them. And make sure that it's someone who's worked within your genre. Okay, you gotta go, bud. Who understands those nuances. One of the classes I teach, I love to read and write romance novels. So I actually teach a class on editing romance, because even within the fiction genres, there are so many differences. If you write thrillers and suspense and you're working with someone who's only ever edited young adult, they're going to miss some things. Now, you don't have to work with someone who's only worked in that genre, but if they have an understanding of it, it's definitely going to help. I personally prefer women's fiction, contemporary romance, well, actually any romance. Yeah, any romance works. I don't understand why you would write a novel and not put romance in it, but some people do. And speculative fiction. I don't really work with mysteries or thrillers. I love to read them, but my brain doesn't work in that way. I can't understand the nuances that really grab someone's attention. And keep the secret, I would completely give it away in the beginning of the book, and there wouldn't really be any mystery. There'd just be a whole bunch of romance that follows. So finding someone who knows what they're talking about is very important. Aside from just personal references, I really highly recommend the Christian Editor Connection. The website is christianeditor.com. It's a free service. So as an author, you just go in, you fill out the form, let the CEC know what you're writing. If you're writing a novel, if you're writing nonfiction, if it's a completed manuscript, or if it's just a book proposal. And then what you're looking for as well. Do you need a full substantive edit? Do you just need a proofread? Are you a beginning author? Are you an intermediate author? You fill in all of that information. We take that information and we have a database full of editors who have been tested. And that's the thing that really sets us apart. They have to complete tests and they have to pass with 90% accuracy in order to be listed as a CEC editor. They also have to have at least 2 years of experience, because you might find someone who knows everything about punctuation and grammar, but if they don't know how to run a business and they don't know how to communicate with you, you might find yourself on the receiving end of waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, because you don't know when they're going to finish with your edit. So all of the editors there have been in business for at least 2 years, many of them for decades.
Yeah.
They've passed the tests, and then we take what the author needs, and we take the specifics, the talents of the editors that we have, and we match them together. That doesn't cost you anything at all as an author. And then it's just freelance editors. So everybody's going to charge differently. Everybody has a different schedule, but we just let the editors and authors figure it out themselves. And that's really how it works with any freelance editor. And a lot of people, especially even people who apply to this through the Christian Editors Connection, they don't realize that editors are busy.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely can you say, I need someone to give me a full edit, look at characterization and plot, and look for plot holes and pacing, and I need this back in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
If you find someone who is available at that specific moment, you might be able to do a rush order on it. But most people are working weeks, if not months in advance, and a lot of authors don't understand that. So we don't have a lot, it can be hard to find a good editor. Yes, you can always find someone to edit your book for $5.
Oh, they got it. So it is christianeditor.com.
Yes.
It's not plural or anything. That's what I was afraid if I'd leave an F
Nope,
off.
it's not plural. Yes, and I see Melissa put that up there. Yes, christianeditor.com. It's been a fantastic resource. I've worked with them this year, and it really is helpful, especially because working with an editor is very personal. And even though you find someone who knows exactly what you need, they might understand all the questions you have. If you don't get along with them, if you don't have just the right connection, it's really hard to work with somebody, because you are taking a manuscript that you may have worked on for a year or 2 years, and essentially you're saying, here, I want you to tell me everything that's wrong with this.
And that's scary.
It is, and it's hard, and not everyone's personalities mesh well. I'm a very direct individual. My husband will let you know that I don't dish out compliments very often. So I have to really remind myself to point out everything that's going well, everything that's good in the book. Because I hone in and I focus on, okay, this is where we need to work. Let's focus on the weaknesses. that doesn't work for everybody. Some people love it, some people don't. That's fine. I understand. I would rather work with someone that I communicate well with. That's someone who I'm sorry, it's my personality. Then someone who I have to hold their hand and pat their back along the way. That's just, I am not the right person for you if that's what you need. And that's fine, because there are a bunch of other editors out there who can do that.
Yeah, but Dory commented in the chat, and I think it's fun. She's true that she says she thinks that's an editor trait in general. You know,
Oh,
and
yes.
be direct. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, you have to be, because really, to help an author improve their manuscript, you really have to point out what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
It's great to lavish praise on what's going right, but if you only develop characters well and you are terrible at plot, then I can praise your characters all day long. It's not going to help you get better because your plot holes are still there. So it's hard. Editors are essentially paid to tell you everything that you're doing wrong. And even if you think you're ready for it, it's really hard.
And that's what jumps out too. I mean, I know when I'm editing, I feel like I'm not really like a blunt person normally, but it's like when I'm editing, it's like those are the things that pop out at me. So those are the things, of course, that I comment on or do whatever. And I have to remind myself too to put little smiley faces and to say nice imagery. I really like this, because otherwise I'll just go through and it's like that's all I'm focusing on as well. But I like it when I get edits back and there's all the little smiley faces.
Yes.
Oh, this is really cool. And when I thought I've written a really great line and no one comments on it, it's like, huh.
Exactly. And so it's a rough life, you sit in your room, in your office. Well, I'm in my living room. If you sit here by yourself all day and point out things that people are doing wrong and hope that they appreciate it in the end.
Yeah.
And you commented about 4 weeks, if you want to turn around really quick. What is a good length of time? I know it probably depends on the amount of words, but can you give us a feedback that if, like say we go to this site, by the time we get matched up with somebody till they get through it, till we get it back, what kind of length of time are we thinking about?
If you are looking at, well, before we talk about that, I want to talk about the different types of editing.
Yes, do that.
I work as a substantive editor. So my edits are usually the longest type of edits. And this is something that I really want to help authors understand, because 9 times out of 10, you get a manuscript and they just want a quick proofread.
Yeah.
Rarely do they need a quick proofread, especially if it's a first novel. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. Everybody has that. I still have my first manuscript sitting on my computer. I'd love to go back to it someday, but it's terrible. It's just terrible. And that's the one that I didn't know what type of edit I needed. So I kind of think of it as like a funnel. You start at the top with the biggest, and before you submit, you have to work all the way down and get it narrowed down until it's just about perfect. But at the top of that pyramid is the substantive, because that's where a lot of stuff happens. And that is something that I recommend for new authors or authors that are switching genres. So if you've always written in romance and you decide you want to write young adult, I recommend getting a substantive edit by someone who's familiar with that genre, just to make sure you're touching base on all of the different points that you need in that. But the substantive is it's big picture. You're looking at characterization, you're looking at plot, pacing, voice, all of the big things that are needed to make sure that the story is going to capture someone's attention and going to hold it throughout the entire length of the novel. Once you have that figured out, then you start to narrow down. I personally consider the next level of editing line editing. And if you go online and look for editors, you will realize quickly that there is no universal definition for any type of edit. And that's one thing that the Christian Pen, it's the Christian Proofreaders and Editors Network, one thing that they're working on establishing within the next year or two is an industry standard definition for each type of edit. But this is how I define it. So you start with the substantive, where you're going to get the full evaluation of everything. And next you go down to the line edit. And I recommend that for people who are maybe getting requests from agents and publishing houses, but they're not signing contracts. It's just not quite grabbing someone's attention. And the line edit is, you've got the plot, you've got the characters, but it's really just looking line by line at the words. Are you using all of the best words? Can the writing be tightened a bit? Can you get rid of words? Are you using the strongest words? And that's more of a nitpicky, but it's a really important step, because it is the difference between, this is a good book, or wow, this captured my attention. So from substantive to line, then you get to the copy edit, and those are the grammar Nazis, and they're the ones who are going to look at the formatting and all of the punctuation, all of the grammar. I bless all of you copy editors. I have no desire to do that. It's not anything I want to learn to do, but they clean up that area. And then finally is the proofread. So especially new authors, if you haven't gone through those first, at least substantive and copy edit, you're not ready for proofread yet. The proofreaders are the ones who are going to clean it up as much as possible. Copy editing, proofreading, very important if you're going to self-publish. If you're submitting to a traditional publisher, in my opinion, as long as you've had that substantive and that line edit, go ahead and submit, because different publishers have different guidelines. I know Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas, who I work for, we have our own style guide. Some rules that, even though the Chicago Manual of Style says do it this way, our publisher doesn't do it that way. It's just the way that it's the personal preference. So when you get down to the copy editing and proofreading, if you are self-publishing, absolutely you have to do it. That's what's going to keep it clean, make it easy to read. If you're traditional publishing, a lot of publishing houses will have those editors for you, or at very least wait until you get their style guide so that you can go through and clean it up the way that they prefer to have the manuscript clean. So,
Bethany, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Now we can hear you, yeah.
So can you differentiate between the copy edit again and the proofread?
the copy edit is looking at, the copy editor is still going to make some changes. So when it gets to the copy editing phase, they're looking at all of the punctuation and grammar and those things. They're still going to make some suggestions, like this doesn't make sense, let's move some things around. Maybe a little bit of line editing in there where they're going to be looking at, is this working, isn't this working? By the time it gets to the proofread, everything should be clean. The proofreader is going to go through and it's not so much in fiction. In nonfiction, copy editors, they're going to do some of that fact checking as well. If you're quoting scripture, they're going to go and check and see, is this what it really says? And if you say that this is the NIV version, nope, this is actually the New King James Version. So they'll be doing those sort of things. By the time it goes to proofreader, all of that should be done. They're just checking, looking for all of those little mistakes that got through, any little typos, things like that. So copy editor still will make changes, suggest changes. The proofreader is really just looking to clean things up. And again, these are definitions based on what the Christian Editor Connection, the Christian Proofreaders and Editors puts together. I kind of use their definitions. Some people might do things a little differently, but that's how I work and that's how I understand those to be. Any other questions on those?
Well, what do you consider a developmental edit to be the same as a substantive edit, or did you say that already and I missed it?
No, the developmental and substantive, those for some people are interchangeable, and
Okay.
for some people it's a little more nitpicky.
Okay.
Most people will use them interchangeably, but it's important for that one to read the definition on the editor's website to find out how they define it. For me personally, if somebody wants to do a developmental, I see that as a little more writing on my side.
Oh, okay.
Whereas, if they want a developmental edit, instead of me just saying, here's some showing and telling, here's this and that, I may actually go in and correct some of those things for them and make a lot of those changes for them. They're also paying me more because it's a developmental edit.
Okay.
I don't mind that. But again, there is no universal definition. So for most people, it'll be interchangeable, but just to make sure before you hire anyone for any of these things, that you know what they're providing with their service, so that, yeah, you're not asking them to do something that you don't want them to do, or that they're doing more than you want them to do.
Right. Right.
Karen, in the chat, someone asked about what do you think of the computer program like Grammarly or Words, Grammar, Stack, and all that. Any feedback on that?
Those can be very helpful, and actually I know several editors who use them. They can help you catch a lot of those little things, but it's always helpful to have someone go through and really read it. I know even working in Word, all the time I get these little squiggles that tell me things are used inappropriately. They're not. There's nothing wrong with them. But the computer program can only understand so much, especially within fiction, because when you look at dialogue and internal thoughts, those don't have to be grammatically correct. They're not going to be grammatically correct. If you're writing with any type of dialect, or if you're writing a historical novel where the speech patterns may be non-traditional or unconventional for what we use, they might not catch those, or they may be marking things inappropriately. So they can be very helpful. And I think actually, if I remember correctly, through the Christian Pen with your membership, some of these different services, people are signing up as a group to get a group discount. Not that we're saying that this is the only thing you should use, but it can definitely help you clean things up. If you're terrible with commas, why not? Yes. Commas, I think, are probably the most misunderstood punctuation out there.
I use them all the time.
Yes, most people do. And my uncle actually hired me at one point to edit his novel. He's 85, and this is just something he does for fun. But I threatened to have my aunt take the comma button right off of his keyboard because I think he thinks the comma rule is every 5 words. I'm not really sure. But for something like that, where, you might hire a substantive editor to help you with the big picture items, you may use Grammarly to help you clean up some of that punctuation, the stuff you're not very strong at. So at least it may not be perfect, but it's going to be a cleaner copy of what you were going to send in. And again, if you're self-publishing, absolutely cannot recommend enough getting your own copy editor and proofreader. But yeah, I mean, they're not perfect, but they can definitely help. So, and I do want to go back to Jean's original question, but does anybody else have questions on that first?
Well, we did have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Is it important to find a developmental editor with a voice similar to yours?
If you hire a good editor, that does not matter.
Okay.
An editor's job is not to change the voice of the book. The editor's job is to help you find your voice and to hone your voice. One of the things, and I actually just wrote a blog post about this, that I've been hearing a lot recently is, well, that's just my voice. Well, if you're telling, if you're writing purple prose, if you are repeating things unnecessarily, that's not your voice. Those are mistakes that you're making. Trust your editor to help clean that up, but your editor will help you strengthen your voice. I'm working with a client right now who everything's very short sentences. It's a novel, so that works for one character. We need to look at what the other characters' voices sound like. So we're not changing the author's voice. We are looking at each character individually to make sure each character sounds different.
Yeah.
Yes, it changes a bit of her style, but unless you want every character in every novel you write to sound exactly the same, it's necessary. It's something that you have to learn. So a good editor will not change your style. And if an editor is changing your voice, then that's something you need to reconsider. Talk with them about that. One of the tips that I give to find if an editor is really changing your voice are the suggestions being made because something is incorrect, or the suggestions being made based on personal preference. My editor recently, my book coming out in October, she went through, gave me a line edit, and pointed out that I had the same sentence structure over and over again. Well, that gets very boring.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's my natural voice, but I don't want to bore my readers. So she went ahead and suggested it. It wasn't technically wrong. It wasn't her personal preference, but it was an observation that she made.
Mm-hmm.
There are some editors who will go through that I've seen, and they just change things. They prefer a little introductory clause. So they take words off the end of a sentence and put an introductory clause. That is a personal preference. There's no reason for that. If a style is being, sentence structure is being overused, absolutely, but make sure that the author knows why you're doing it. If you're working as an editor, or if your editor doesn't tell you why they're making changes, question it. I'm not saying don't trust your editor. Trust your editor. But if you don't understand why suggestions are being made, ask, because you need to know if this person is doing something to help strengthen your book, or if this person is doing something to make the book more what they would prefer to read. So I hope that helps.
Good.
A long way to answer that question.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, going back to Jean's original question, which
Okay,
I
yes.
don't know that I even remember what it is.
Yes. Oh no, I remember this one.
Good.
Jean's original question was, how long can you expect an edit to take? And I learned this about a decade ago, and then I forgot about it and discovered it recently again. In the Chicago State Manual of Style, it actually tells you how long you can expect. So if you're looking at a 100,000 word book and you need a full substantive edit on that, on average, you can plan on, depending on the experience of the editor and the quality of the manuscript, 1 to 4 pages per hour.
Wow.
So you got to figure 250 pages or 250 words on average per page. I don't have a calculator in front of me here, but so you're looking at 100,000 words divided by 250 words per page. And let's say you have a good editor and your writing isn't too bad, maybe 4 pages per hour. And you also need to check to see how many hours a week your editor edits. I only try to work about 20 hours a week on editing because I work for the Christian Editors Connection. I work with Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas. I've got 2 dogs and 2 cats that need to be walked and fed, and the house has to be cleaned and all that good stuff. Plus there's the social media, there's so much behind the scenes things when you run your own business. So I really only edit about 20 hours a week. So it's going to take me 4 to 6 weeks to edit a full manuscript. There are some people I know that they'll edit 40, 50 hours a week. Awesome for them. My butt can't handle that much time in the chair, so I need to get up. But that's a good formula to remember. So about 1 to 4 pages per hour, 250 words per page, and then you can calculate from there. So that's where I usually get the 4 to 6 weeks. Again, you might find someone who can do it in 3 to 4 weeks, but I would say at least a month for a substantive edit. So.
Okay, we have some more questions in the chat. I don't want to miss any of them, so let me see. How much can it cost to go through all those edits? Like if someone's doing a substantive and then a line and then the copy editing and proofreading.
That is, I have no good answer for you on that. It depends on the editor. I only do substantive. So if I work with someone who, suppose I work with someone who wants to self-publish, I do substantive. I have a partner who I pass along all the copy edits and proofreads to her.
Okay.
So if you were to hire me for that, I could help provide all the services, but I'm only going to do half of them. She's going to do the rest of them. There are some people who will do substantive edits for about a penny a word. I charge anywhere from 3 to 4, sometimes 5 cents a word. So depending on the length of the manuscript, for my services, if it's an 80,000 word manuscript, it could be anywhere from $3,000 to $4,500. Again, that's 6 weeks worth of work. You're paying for the expertise, you're paying for the support before and after, and just the understanding of the fiction industry. There are some editors that charge significantly more. I know there are some editors who, a developmental edit with them will cost you about 10 grand.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it depends too. You know, if I'm going to work with somebody repeatedly, yeah, I will absolutely work with you. Let's establish a relationship, because it's fun when you get to work with people over and over again. But I would say if you're looking at a good quality editor from substantive through proofreading, you're going to need to set aside a few $1,000s for that. Again, depending on who you're working with, what you're looking for as well. If you're looking for just enough to get published, or if you're looking for stellar, spectacular, I want the absolute best, probably anywhere from 4,000 for the bare minimum up to 10,000. It's not cheap,
No.
but it's worth it, especially if, as an author, you stay teachable. If you're willing to learn throughout the process. My goal is always to work with authors so that they can fire me. I don't want to be working with someone doing substantive edits for the rest of their career. If you're hiring me for substantive edits on your 10th book, you're clearly not learning. That's going to be very expensive for you. My goal, my hope is that I'm able to help teach you throughout the process, so that maybe in the future you come back and you're just getting the line edit from me. And then from there, hopefully to the point where you just go on and you can work directly with the copy editors and the proofreaders.
And the proofreaders, yeah. And someone did ask about using different editors on the same work. So that's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that was interesting to me when I started working with the Christian Editors Connection, is how many editors out there only do copy edits and proofreads. Like, you people are crazy. That's the most boring part of the book. But that's
hard for me.
That's all they do. They don't do anything substantive. They don't do any developmental, no critiques. They just like that portion of it, which is great. Like I said, God bless them. I have no desire to do any of that. I took those tests years ago. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just offer all these services. I scored 65%. So I started to question whether or not that was something I should be offering. And now that I've worked with the CEC longer and I've really looked at these tests, yeah, I have absolutely no desire to do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be doing that either.
I'm completely happy to pass that along to somebody else. So.
Okay, so another question. How does an editor work differently with a children's writer with picture books? I know with critiques, we typically share general feedback and line edits if requested. Anything about children's editing?
That is a fantastic question for Linda Harris. The children's book expert that I know. I don't work with children's books. I have passed along several clients to other people because it is so different, and I don't want to hinder anyone or give them any bad advice, and I definitely don't want them paying me for that. So I usually refer people for children's books onto someone else. We have several children's book experts through the CEC. And there's also the Society for Children's Writers and Illustrators, I believe. I usually refer people there because that group specifically deals with children's books, children's literature. So you should be able to find some good references and resources through that organization. So, sorry, I can't be more helpful. I just like to read them to kids. I don't work with them.
No, I mean, we also have comments that people are glad that you know your strengths, you know your time, you know what works best for you, and I think that's important too when you are looking for an editor.
Well, and I learned that the hard way when I agreed to substantive edit 2 books in a month, and I felt like I was sitting at the computer for 14 hours a day. And I realized I was sitting at the computer for 14 hours a day, and I was exhausted and cranky, and I ate a lot of pizza that month because I just didn't cook. So.
Oh, great. Okay, someone wanted to know if you use track changes.
Absolutely, yes. And if you send me something in PDF, I will very kindly ask you to change it over to Word.
Yeah.
If not, I found a free conversion website where I can convert it to Word. I have a PDF reader, that's it. So I use Microsoft Word and track changes for everything. But I have figured through my experience, I know how to change the settings. If you don't change the settings, then anytime you change a comma or a period, you get a little bubble on the side. It makes it very difficult to read the comments, and it makes it really overwhelming for the author when they get back a document and the whole side of the screen is just bubbles they can't even read. So if your editor is using track changes, you can ask them to tweak the features so that the punctuation, things like that, the changes don't appear in a bubble. And if you are editing, I suggest that you do that. It just makes it an easier read for the author. So.
Oh, great. That's great. Okay. Rhonda said, as an unpublished author, it seems like a huge financial hurdle. Do you only hire an editor after you've received an advance?
This is the hard part of the publishing process. Really, unless you've spent a lot of time to really hone your writing, chances are it's going to be very difficult to get an agent or to get a publisher and to get that advance until you've had your manuscript edited. I'm not aware, and I haven't worked with many larger publishing houses. I'm not aware, though, of many large publishers that do the substantive editing anymore. That is something that they expect to be done by the time it comes to them. Some line edits, yes, but I'm not sure of anyone that provides that level of editing. One thing that I have been recommending to people, it's the long way, this is what I had to do. I've never had a critique partner. I've never had a critique group. I have tried and tried. It has never worked for me. I could not afford an editor, so I took the long way and I learned how to edit.
Yeah.
Once you start editing other people's work, that little light bulb goes off and you start seeing those issues in your own writing. And you don't even have to do it for a living. But just learning some of those editing techniques will help give you a more critical eye for when you're going through your manuscripts. But right now, I get referrals from agents who they like a submission, but they know that the manuscript needs work. So agents are sending me authors.
Wow.
Because they know that those books need work before they're going to get published. So it's kind of the catch-22 where you don't get any money until your book sells, but you kind of need the money up front for the edit.
Yeah.
But most editors, good editors, kind people will work with you through that process because it is expensive and we realize that. But we're also readers and we want good books to be published. So we're usually willing to work with authors to help make that possible for them. So I saw that amazing.
Yeah.
Bethany?
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I had 2 comments. For nonfiction, with the proposal, really you only need the 3 chapters to send in to a publisher or an agent. So you could just get someone to do a developmental or a line edit on those first 3 because you don't have to have the book written and they're not going to look at the whole book. So that is a little bit of a benefit. And then what in my experience, because this changes, the publishers, when they send back our edits, it's almost a mix of developmental and line edit. So some places they're saying, am I still with you guys?
Yes.
That's terrible. It keeps freezing. So you've said this already, or we need to put a different story here or change this area. And then also they're saying, okay, we need to do better words or whatever. So almost like, it seems like I get a mix of those 2 from the publisher when it comes back. And my third comment was I had an editor at a publishing house tell me that when they're looking at a manuscript at the pub board, that the editing costs is one of the big reasons why a book will get a yes or no. It's not just the marketing department, it's how much they're going to have to pay in editing. And so before the manuscript gets sent in, it might be worth having someone look at it because that could be the difference between a yes or a no.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And one of the things I let people know, if they're either on a tight budget financially or time-wise, consider professional critique. Right now, because of a lot of the other work that I'm doing, I'm really only taking freelance critiques because just for time purposes, I can usually do a critique in a week or two for
So
a full
what do you mean
manuscript.
by a critique? What are you talking? How's that different?
The difference with the critique and a substantive edit, the critique, I will go through and I'm going to send you a review of everything. So I'll read the full manuscript. And at the end of chapters, maybe make some comments. If there's a huge section of backstory, I might highlight that and say this is an example of what needs to be cut.
Yeah.
But overall, it's not going to be line by line. There's not going to be marks on every page. There will be very few marks on the actual manuscript. Instead, I'm going to give you a comprehensive opinion of the manuscript. These are the characters I liked. These are their strengths, their weaknesses. This is what you can do to help improve your characterization. These are some plot strengths. These are plot weaknesses. I always try to give suggestions. I was working with one author who wrote a romance and it just needed more conflict. Like, well, we could do this or this or this. And she didn't like any of those options, but she came up with another one and it was a great option. And I think it worked really well within the story. So the critique will still let you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, but it's not on a page by page, line by line instance. It's just going to be overall, here's what you need to work on, here's what you need to do. And it is, like I said, quite a bit quicker. And it's much less expensive. Again, at the 250 words per page, for me personally, I charge $2 per page for a critique. So that could be the difference between $3,500 and $800.
Yeah.
So you'll still get that feedback. And actually, my agent posted this on her Facebook page recently. If you can't afford a full edit or full critique, I'll do first chapters, I'll do second chapters. That's fine. The important thing is to take all of that information from the critique, from the first few chapters, and apply it to the whole manuscript. They've had several people submit to them who got professional critiques of the first 3 chapters, cleaned up the first 3 chapters, and didn't do anything with the rest of the book. So chances are, if you use a lot of purple prose in the first 3 chapters, you probably use it in the last 3 chapters as well. So that's another option that will at least give you a professional review. It's a little more affordable. And again, a little faster on the turnaround time. So that's another option.
I thought that's probably what you're talking about. And I call those evaluations. And that's the work I like to do because I don't want to get into all that other stuff either. But I like just reading through a manuscript and then saying, here's your voice, your tone, the plot, characters, like you said, and just kind of hit backstory, show, don't tell. Because many writers, and I'm sure you know this too, many beginning writers, it's the same mistakes. And same, I made them, you probably made them. I mean, we all make these, we think we're doing it, but we really aren't doing it right. And we just need someone to point that out in a different way.
Absolutely.
Bethany, are there other questions I've missed?
I was going to say, or to stop using commas in the middle of every sentence.
Yes.
My mom is my editor, so like someone, Dory, I think, was saying that her mom was her editor too.
Yeah.
several mother-daughter teams.
I do see a question from Dory.
Okay.
What is purple prose?
Oh, okay.
Purple prose is over-the-top description. When you have characters that go on and on for pages describing the color of the grass and the feel of it between their toes, it's lovely. It creates very vivid pictures, but it's more than is necessary.
I'm guilty of that sometimes.
Yes. And I have the other, I go to the other side. My editor is like, can you show what this looks like? I have no idea, because I try to overcompensate for all the people who write too much. But purple prose is it's anything that's over the top.
Yeah.
And if you can show it well in a sentence or two, then don't use 4 sentences. Just let the reader see what it is, let the reader feel it, understand it, and then move on. Keep the story moving forward. So
Robin says she had a writing coach work with her throughout her entire manuscript. Does she still need a developmental? And there again, it's like, okay, what exactly is a writing coach? What does a writing coach do that an editor doesn't do? And I imagine that varies as well.
absolutely. There are some people who, they're going to call themselves coaches or mentors. And again, it depends on what they're offering in that service to you. So double check. My thought would be, for me personally, if I'm working with someone, if I'm coaching them, I'm going to be helping them identify and correct the most basic writing mistakes. I would hope that's what your coach is doing as well. And if that's the case, if you can look back at your manuscript and see, okay, here's the first version. I worked with it through my coach, and I can see that the writing's tighter. I can see that there's a lot less telling. I can see that I have stronger characters, more consistent characters. If you can see that in your writing, then I wouldn't think you would need a developmental edit. If you're looking at your manuscripts and you can't tell the difference, then you probably still need something like that. So.
Great. What common mistakes do you see again and again and again in the manuscripts that you get from clients?
There's 6. There are people that are telling instead of showing, big info dumps. But I'm starting to notice trends in published books that I'm reading.
Okay.
And because I see them in published books, a lot of my clients are submitting writing this way. And I know this is hard to accept and nobody wants to hear it. The truth is, new writers, you do have to meet a higher standard than experienced writers. So if you're reading a book by Debbie May Comer and she does something, it doesn't matter. She's Debbie May Comer. As long as her name's on it, somebody's going to buy it. Right. Until people know who you are, you have to meet that high standard. So just because you see it being published doesn't mean it's going to work for you as a new writer. And so some of those things that I see, one is what I call active telling. This happens all of the time. I'm sorry, I'm going to ruin novels for you. Pick a novel up off your shelf, open it up to a chapter, and see how many of them start with a character doing something. He's out for a jog, or he's making breakfast, or he's working on his car. And then there's 2 paragraphs of info dump telling me what he did the day before. Well, they're starting with action, which is what you want. But then they're leading right into an info dump. Instead, what you put in those 2 paragraphs, show me that. Write the scene. Let me see what happened instead of that reflection. So that's something that I've seen a lot of. Found myself doing it even. Thank you to Irene, my editor, for pointing that out to me.
Yeah.
Another thing that is becoming a little cliche, it's watch for the actions, especially within fiction, that your characters do. I have yet to pick up a romance novel where the heroine does not bite her lip. I don't know anyone in real life that I've ever seen bite their lip, but every single book has a lip biter.
Lip biter.
So I can promise you, any books that I edit, if you read a book that doesn't have a lip biter, check for the editor. It might be me.
I'm going to go through my manuscripts and the lip biting.
Search the words lip bites and lip.
Yeah.
Yes. The other one is the hero who tucks her hair behind her ear. Every book. Yes, and it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just happens in every single book. So if you've read it 100 times, think about your character, the characters that you're writing. What's something unique to that character that they could do? So it's just looking for those things that they're very sweet and they're very romantic, and every time you read it, you kind of go, but if you've read it that many times, try to come up with something different or something unique. One of the characters that I have in the book that came out last year, based very loosely on my husband, is just a man's man. So, he doesn't see the world in emerald, and he sees things in John Deere green,
Yeah.
because, so he doesn't look into, her blue eyes and see cerulean or anything like that. It's the same color as his first motorcycle, things like that. So
That's good.
just looking for, if you've seen it a lot, look for something else, a different way to say it. Other than that, really, pick up Jeff Gerke's book. It's over there on my shelf, The Art and Craft of Writing Christian Fiction, or Brown and King's Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. Any of those, they are fantastic resources for really pinpointing the most common mistakes. And one of the mistakes I made was I waited until I had a completed manuscript before I read Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. Don't. That book is fantastic. I learned so much reading that. I wish I had read it before I started writing. But if you're a new writer, I recommend those first. I know that there are some other books out there. You're writing the breakout novel, and there's plot versus character, plot and structure. Some great books out there. But if you are new and you are really just starting to understand the basics, I recommend those two, because they look at all of those little things. Yes, you need to work on your plot, but if you don't know the difference between telling and showing, even if you have a great plot, you're going to bore people with it by telling so much.
Yeah, I recommend self-editing for fiction writers to almost everybody that I critique or am involved with in any way. Okay, well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so everybody want to come back on, and Bethany, if you'll help me get people back on who are having trouble getting on, let us know if you are, and you'll have a few minutes to ask your question on the recording yourself if you still have questions. And I'm not sure I got everybody's too, so if I missed something, be sure and wave your hand and say so. Questions, anybody? Says everyone's popping back on. Yes, Sherilyn. Oh, nope, you don't have a question. Okay. Just waving. All right. All right, is that everybody? Okay, any questions from anyone? Covered it all.
I am that good.
You are good. Okay, Robin's having trouble getting back on, and LaDonna. So we're gonna try to get you guys back on real quick.
And if you have any questions that you think of afterwards, you can always email me or find me on Facebook. I have an author page and I have my editing page. So you can message me on either one of those.
Oh, thank you.
I love chatting about writing with people. I often have people ask if, can I talk with you about a book I'm working on? I'll pay you your consulting fee. I'm like, I love to talk about editing. Buy me a latte. We're fine. So.
That's great. Someone asked about the blog. Now, it's karinbeery.com/blog.
That is my author.
And guess who's on there if you go there today?
Yes. And my author blog, I'm really focusing just more on reading, because I got so wrapped up in my own writing and editing that I stopped reading. So I reformatted everything, and I have people like Johnny on who I'm just asking about their favorite books. I want to know what other people read, what they have read, what they are reading, and I post a lot of book reviews on there now.
Yeah.
But as far as editing, my blog is rightnowedits.com/blog, and it's WRITE Now Edits.
I think I got that correct.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, Right Now Edits. Yeah.
And that's the my Facebook page as well. I have a Karin Beery author Facebook page, and I have a Right Now Edits Facebook page, because people who want to read my books are not necessarily interested on how to properly proofread your manuscript.
Yeah.
And some people who want to know how to proofread manuscript don't really care about contemporary Christian women's fiction. So
There you go.
yes, I keep those separate.
Yeah.
I hope people appreciate it.
So yeah, so we're gonna put a plug in for both those, and I'd love for you guys to want to make comments on Karen's blog on my stuff on my
Yes.
yeah, this is great. This is great. Any last questions then before we say goodbye? I want y'all to have a chance.
Annette was raising her hand, but it looks like
Okay.
she's muted.
Annette, are you? Yep, you're muted.
This was perfect. The timing was excellent. You know, like I'm almost done working with my coach, and we've gone through a lot of this stuff. So I'm looking for my next step. So this is awesome.
Oh, great.
Good. I'm glad it could help. Like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasted some money and a lot of time. So if nothing else, even if I'm not the right editor for someone, I just want to help make it a smoother process for people. And I can admit that I do this all out of selfish ambition because I just want to read better books. So I figure if I can help people write better books, even if it's finding other people to help them do that, then I can read better books. So.
That's right. That's right. Annette, did you have something?
Sure. Who was the children's editor that you spoke of? Linda
Harris.
Linda Harris. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and I can't remember the name of her editing business right now.
I'm sure Google can help.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to my question in chat from earlier on about, I think I always have a fear I'm going to lose my voice when my editor, who's my mom and knows me very well, does my rewrites. I mean, she has to do a little bit of rewrite here and there in the developmental because it's my first attempt at a novel and I need the help on it. She has a lot of suggestions about character development. She can say, why don't you think of what your protagonist's deep, dark secret is going to be? She needs one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those kinds of things. And she really does a good job not changing my voice, but I always have that fear that in the rewrite it's going to come back and sound like her and not me.
That is a fear that a lot of authors have. Again, my encouragement is just as long as the editor isn't telling you exactly what you have to do.
Right.
Now, if you have a publishing contract and your publisher says, this is what we want you to do, that's a completely different ballgame because at that point you've got a contract, you've agreed to let them make changes. But if you're working with a freelance editor, really the editor should be offering you suggestions.
Right.
And I let my clients know, I mark everything. I am going to mark every single instance of telling, every passive voice. I'm going to mark the whole thing. If you keep repeating information, I'm going to mark it through the whole thing and say, you don't need to repeat this. I already know it. But I honestly don't expect them to cut everything because you got to remind your reader every now and then that he's got brown hair and brown eyes.
Yeah.
But if you mention it in every chapter, it's going to get redundant and it's going to start to annoy the reader. So I will cut it every single time. And I leave it up to the author to decide where it needs to go and, you know, when it needs to be when the reader needs to be reminded. So as long as your editor's making suggestions and making it clear that there's suggestions, the control is really yours.
She tells me that all the time. So.
Yes. Yeah, you do not have to make any of the changes. But remember that your editor is your editor for a reason. So as long as it's the technical, you know, you're telling here this needs to be showing, and then let the author show. Now, if it's rewritten and so it needs to say this, then you're looking at maybe some editor intrusion that could be messing with the voice. So, you know, I might offer suggestions if I think the author doesn't understand what I mean. If the author doesn't understand how to show emotions, I'll say, okay, here's my suggestion. You don't have to keep this, but something like this. And then ultimately it's, you know, it's on the author's shoulders whether or not to accept. And I don't think the voice, as long as you're not letting that person rewrite it, I don't think the voice is too much of an issue. Because it's complete suggestions. Or even if, you know, she rewrites something and you don't like it, go back in and tweak it. as long as you're not saying, oh no, I'm going to stick with telling. Telling is my voice. No, telling is not your voice. Telling is wrong. It needs to be changed. But it's ultimately your decision. So there's, if you're familiar with the Proofreaders and Editors Network, Kathy Ide started it years ago. She's been in the business for a long time. And if you have questions about anything editing wise, ask Kathy. She can ask you. And one of the things that she told us at the editors conference that she runs is the greatest compliment she's received was an author who said she loves giving her stuff to Kathy because Kathy helped her find her voice. And that's what your editor should be doing. We're not stifling, but just making it better, giving you a better vocabulary, giving you the better, better tools. But ultimately, yeah, you get to decide how to use those. So.
Okay, so she's doing a good job.
Yes. Yep. As long as she is not as long as she's not rewriting and you're not just blindly accepting it, then it sounds like you've got a good relationship there. So.
Good thing. All right. Well, again, Karin, just thank you. This has been so helpful. I especially appreciated the distinctions between the different kinds of editing, and I'm glad to see that Christian Penn is taking a, making that effort to standardize those definitions that are just so crazy, and just all the other tips and info that you gave us too. So next week on Writers Chat, we're going to have with us Valerie Lussey, who is with Southern Living Magazine. She's an editor there and a travel writer. So, we've never done anything, I don't think, on travel writing. So that's going to be really cool. So hope to have you back next week. If you're watching the replay, we'd love to have you join us anytime. We meet every Tuesday morning, 11 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Central. You can also join us on Facebook. We have a Facebook Writers Chat group and a Facebook Writers Chat page. So, check it out. And all of our videos are on both of those so that you can access past episodes. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.